Ryan Lindgren is back with the New York Rangers on a one-year deal. We discuss why mostly everyone should feel good about this signing. However, will this be Ryan Lindgren's final year as a member of the New York Rangers?
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1121 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. So I want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sport stops scoring the way we all want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we are back here on Locked On New York Rangers. As some of you might be aware, I did take last week off, back refreshed, ready to go, ready to count down the days until New York Ranger hockey starts. And we will have Ranger hockey next month. That's just a beautiful sentence to say right off the top here. Now, granted, it is preseason hockey, but you guys know, you're big-time Ranger fans. Most people who watch this, everybody wants to be right on top of everything that the Rangers do. And obviously, like I said, we will have Ranger hockey next month in the form of preseason games. But as far as like the biggest things that happened between the last time we talked, before I took my little break there, and today, to me, the biggest thing, no doubt, was the re-signing of restricted free agent Ryan Lindgren. Ryan Lindgren had arbitration rights. He was 3 days away from potentially going to an arbitration hearing with the Rangers, but both sides avoid all that by agreeing to a one-year deal worth $4.5 million. And after this season is over and the contract expires, Ryan Lindgren will then be an unrestricted free agent. And that, of course, begs the question, will this be Ryan Lindgren's final season as a member of the Rangers? We're going to talk more about that a little bit later in today's episode. But as far as like initial takeaways from when I saw this news break and, found out that, of course, Ryan Lindgren would be back with the New York Rangers, a couple of quick takeaways right off the bat here. It ended up being a higher cap hit and less term than I was expecting. It's sort of the inverse of the Vincent Trocheck contract. We talked about really on and off ever since Vincent Trocheck has become a member of the New York Rangers, the signing of him in the first place. And then, as the years have gone by here, the Rangers, what they did with Trocheck, they gave him a lot of years as a way to keep the average annual value down. There's give and take with all these negotiations, and the more years you give somebody, the more long-term stability they have, and the more willing they probably are to take a little bit less, marginally less per season than they might be if it was only 1 or 2 year deal. With Lindgren, it's the exact opposite. And that's not really that surprising because, going through the entire offseason here, we heard, from all the usual sources, all the Ranger beat writers and everything, everybody that's in the know, that the biggest point of contention between the Rangers and Ryan Lindgren was going to be the term. As far as average annual value, it sounded like they were in the same ballpark, at least somewhat close. But term was an issue, and it seems like the Rangers, again, they basically did the opposite of what they did with Trocheck. They gave him a high average annual value for a obviously very short deal. It's as short as it gets. It's only 1 year. So that's my first takeaway. That was interesting to see. I thought maybe there'd be a few more years and a little bit less money per season. That's not what happened. 1 year, $4.5 million. The other big takeaway here is that I feel like just about everybody should at least be okay with this signing. If not, even better than that. You might feel great about this signing. I feel pretty good about it myself. I think it's the kind of deal that makes everybody happy. And we start with the man himself, Ryan Lindgren. I believe he probably wanted more term. It certainly seems like he's happy being a New York Ranger. It certainly seems like he wants to stick around. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, the major point of contention between the Rangers and Ryan Lindgren was always said to be how long the contract would be. That was going to be an issue. And honestly, even next offseason, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but even next offseason, that's going to be another, talking point between the Rangers and Lindgren if they want to do a long-term deal after the season ends. I get the feeling that Lindgren would have rather had a longer contract at slightly less average annual value. I can't speak for the man himself, but just knowing him, knowing the style that he plays, and again, getting the impression that he's very happy as a member of the New York Rangers, I get the feeling that he probably would have made that trade-off. As it is, though, Ryan Lindgren is in a very good place. He can't be upset about this contract because $4.5 million per season, that's more than we thought he was going to get. Now, granted, again, it is just 1 year, but I think a lot of us had Lindgren pegged around like, $3.8 million per season, maybe like in the low $4 million, $4.1 million, somewhere in that ballpark. Instead, he gets quite the raise. He was making $3 million per season for the last 3 years. And for this upcoming season, going to be $4.5 million. So you got to feel good about that if you're Ryan Lindgren. There were also a lot of Ranger fans who were concerned about giving Ryan Lindgren too much term. And I think those people are probably pretty happy about this as well, because Ryan Lindgren is an effective player for the New York Rangers. He's been entrenched in a top 4 role for basically half a decade now. I mean, that doesn't even seem possible, but it appears to be a fact. Ryan Lindgren has played parts of 6 seasons with the New York Rangers. This will be his 7th coming up. And if you were concerned about his body breaking down, his game just not aging very well, Dan Girardi 2.0, the whole works. We see what people say, and there might be some people listening or watching this podcast right now that felt the same way, that, his game just might not age as well as some other defensemen. I think those concerns are somewhat valid. But once you saw, if you're in that group, once you saw that this is only a 1-year deal, I get the feeling you probably breathed a little bit easier once you saw that news. Then you've got, a very simple group, a group that I'm in with a lot of you, the group that just really likes Ryan Lindgren, really sees him as the heart and soul of this team. I've said before, he's probably my favorite player currently on the New York Rangers, and you just wanted to see him back with the New York Rangers. And it is only 1 year, but if nothing else, Ryan Lindgren will be back. He'll be in his usual role, in the top 4, playing with Adam Fox, more likely than not, certainly being a huge part of penalty kills, throwing his body around, blocking shots, spilling blood, doing all the things that Ryan Lindgren does. And if you're in that camp as I am, that you just really like Ryan Lindgren, you're really a fan of his game, then you should be happy about this too. I will say, and again, we will elaborate on this a little bit later in today's episode, but I will say, if you're a big Ryan Lindgren fan, you love him being a part of the New York Rangers, my advice is enjoy this upcoming season, because it's far from a guarantee that he will be back with the Rangers once the upcoming season concludes. But again, we'll discuss that a little bit later. But bottom line, I mean, look, Ryan Lindgren, what you see is what you get. I mean, he pretty much is what he is at this point, and what he is a very solid player. As I mentioned, part of 6 seasons with the team, came over from the Boston Bruins in the Rick Nash trade. He had a short 5-game stint with the Rangers in 2018, 2019. Then the following season, 9 games with the Wolfpack, got called back up to the Rangers for a second time, never looked back. He's been here ever since. 333 games, 10 goals, 70 assists, 80 points, plus 99 in those seasons as a member of the New York Rangers, averaging 1857 of ice time, 465 block shots, and 514 hits. Very physical player, despite not being the biggest defenseman in the league, not by a long shot. And as I mentioned just a second ago, touched on it very briefly, huge part of the penalty kill as well. And that's invaluable. The Rangers, look, they've had an awesome penalty kill for the last handful of seasons here. A lot of people like to say that the Rangers kind of live and die by their special teams. I think that's pushing it. Obviously it's a big part of their success. I think, 5v5, they can certainly stand to improve. I don't think they're a team that doesn't know what they're doing 5v5, but bottom line, Ryan Lindgren, as part of the Ranger penalty kill, he's been a huge part of that. Only Jacob Trouba averaged more time per game on the PK last year than Ryan Lindgren did. And the two of them are usually defense partners when the Rangers are shorthanded. Ryan Lindgren, second most time per game on the PK at 2 minutes and 43 seconds for the Rangers last year. Also 17 points for the Rangers last season. I keep hearing about how, Lindgren can't contribute anything offensively. I don't think that's true. I mean, that's not a, minuscule amount, especially for a defenseman. And bottom line, you don't need 6 offensive defensemen. The Rangers have a lot of defensemen between Fox, Miller, even Schneider's adding a little bit of offense to his game. Trouba's going to get some assists. Zach Jones is known as an offensive defenseman. You don't need 6 offensive defensemen. It's okay if Ryan Lindgren is a little bit more the stay-at-home type. He's out there with Adam Fox. You get plenty of offense from him. So I think those two complement each other very well, and it's okay if Ryan Lindgren is not stuffing the score sheet every single game. Also, the Stephen McDonald Extra Effort Award in 2023. And my own official stat, pretty sure he led the NHL in blood spilled this last season. He's got about a 3 or 4 year stretch where he's tops in that category. But as far as where this leaves the Rangers with cap space, because as I mentioned, this was really the last thing on the Ranger offseason checklist as far as things they had to do before the season begins. I know some people, they look at the contract and man, $4.5 million for Lindgren. That's a little high, isn't it? It is, but it doesn't really matter right now because where the Rangers are in free agency, where the entire NHL is in free agency, there's really not much left out there. There's a couple of guys that are still kicking around, and some guys will sign contracts kind of late in the game, I'm sure. But the Rangers don't seem to be in on any of these players. And Ryan Lindgren was a bigger priority for them than anybody that's still, kind of looming out there as an unrestricted free agent as I'm recording this. As far as where it leaves the Rangers salary cap space, it's tight. Again, it's always tight with the Rangers with their salary cap space. They right now have only $623,476 in salary cap space. This is per puckpedia.com. We can't use Cap Friendly anymore. Puckpedia has been a pretty solid resource ever since Cap Friendly essentially closed its doors. But if they go into the season this way, 23 players on the roster, this would give them $2.8 million at the trade deadline. But the other thing here to keep in mind, and we're going to do some salary cap gymnastics a little bit later in today's episode as well. The other thing to keep in mind is that if they were to carry 22 players going into the start of the season, like say they start Adam Edstrom in the AHL, then that would leave them with $1.47 million in cap space to start the season. That would translate to $6.7 million at the trade deadline. So at that point, you got some money to play with. You should be able to bring in at least, two solid impact players if you want to go down that road. If you're the New York Rangers and you're looking to buy, which I believe they will be at the trade deadline this upcoming season. So you're in pretty good shape. And that doesn't even take into account the fact that other teams and deals that you might swing, they can, retain some salary for whoever you might acquire. So they'll be all right. I think they'll be fine. Maybe you're of the belief that you'd have liked to see them go after this guy or that guy in free agency rather than Ryan Lindgren. But bottom line, at this stage in the game, re-signing Ryan Lindgren was the only thing to do. And I think a lot of the people that were, worried about how his game is going to age, this should alleviate some of those concerns because it's only a one-year deal. And we'll see if he ends up with the Rangers past this season, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So we're going to keep talking about everything having to do with Ryan Lindgren here, the ramifications of this signing. We're going to get into some of the winners and losers of the Ryan Lindgren contract, and we will do that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing the way we all want them to. But FanDuel lets us keep the sports going whenever we want. All we have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that we're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, we just want to take a minute to thank everybody, as always, for tuning into the Locked On New York Ranger podcast, your team every day. And for the everydayers, you guys are definitely going to want to stick around. As I mentioned, we got Ranger hockey in barely a month here. Going to be continuing our offseason series where we take a look at best and worst case scenarios for every player on the team. We've already covered Chris Kreider and Mika Zibanejad. I think probably in the next one, we'll move on to Riley Smith. That could be the Ranger top line or, listed as the top line going into the season. So that'll be probably in tomorrow's episode. But for right now, let's keep the spotlight on Ryan Lindgren and more specifically, the winners and losers of this deal, this 1 year, $4.5 million deal that Ryan Lindgren just signed. For starters, a winner. Touch on this a little bit earlier. Ryan Lindgren, the man himself, he's clearly a winner in this deal. You could maybe say that, you could look at him as a loser because maybe he wants a little bit more money, a little bit more so than more money. I think he'll be very happy with the high average annual value. But again, just that. He's got the high average annual value. He gets a hefty raise on what he's been making for the last 3 years, going to make $4.5 million for this upcoming season. He gets to stay where he's comfortable, where he's happy. He was drafted by the Bruins, but he never played for them. This is the only team that he's ever known in the NHL. So he gets to stay put. He gets to stay with his buddies. He's got another chance to rejoin a team that just won the President's Trophy, was just 2 wins away from the Stanley Cup final. And Ryan Lindgren, he's one of those guys that's in the trenches. He's in the weeds every single night. And if the Rangers are the last team standing for this upcoming season, you got to believe he's going to play a big role in making that happen. So he seems happy here. Seems like he wanted to stay, and he gets his wish at least for 1 more year. On top of that, He will be an unrestricted free agent after this season ends. He's going to have an interesting market, and it could depend a lot on how many games he plays this season. Injuries have kind of crept up on him over the years. It seems like he misses a handful of games here, misses a handful of games there. He's never out for like a super amount of time. You don't see a situation where Ryan Lindgren misses 2/3 of the season, half the season, but he'll miss like 6 or 8 games here, and maybe he'll have like a 12-game absence there. He always gets back in there. I think Ryan Lindgren playing 82 games is probably unrealistic, but if he can find a way to play 77, 78 games, somewhere in that ballpark, I think teams are going to feel good about that, and I think that's going to work to Ryan Lindgren's benefit when he becomes an unrestricted free agent, whether that means he gets a new contract from the Rangers or any other team in the NHL. That will certainly work. But either way, he'll be a UFA after the season, and teams are definitely going to be interested in him. They're going to be wary of his injury history, and I do think he'll have an interesting market, but I also think he'll get a pretty nice payday for himself after this upcoming season. So as far as losers of this deal, I'm going to say fans that wanted a longer contract for Ryan Lindgren. There's a lot of reasons you can come up with to keep Ryan Lindgren in the fold. There's some reasons you can come up with to move on from him. But I think it's also very important to remember this game has a pulse. And we can talk about the cap hit and what the salary cap is, and can they afford Ryan Lindgren, and maybe they should go out and get this defenseman, or maybe they have a defenseman, a prospect coming along. You'd like to eventually see him take the reins. Look, Ryan Lindgren, we're going to elaborate on this a little bit later in today's episode too, but he is very, very important to this team. The proof is in the pudding when it comes to the Ranger record when he's in the game versus the Ranger record when he is not in the game. And it's far too big of a sample size to simply ignore it. So there is a part of me that, man, I wish they would have gotten Ryan Lindgren under contract for at least 2 or 3 years. Let's leave him here. If you sign him to a 3-year deal, he's still in his 20s when the contract runs out. There probably other reasons why they didn't want to make that happen. They got a lot of guys becoming free agents next offseason, which will probably be bigger priorities than Ryan Lindgren. But be that as it may, I think a loser of this deal, and I'll throw myself into this group too, are the people that wanted at least a little bit longer of a contract for Ryan Lindgren. Another winner from this deal, I'm going to say Adam Fox. I mean, how can you not? Adam Fox, as we've seen ever since he's come into this league, basically took the NHL by storm. He was basically an elite defenseman from the second he got here, and he's only gotten better over the years. Won a Norris. He'll be up there at the top of the league, near the top of the league, certainly in time on the ice, in points by a defenseman. I'm sure he'll get some Norris votes probably every season from now until the very foreseeable future. It's going to be, he's always going to be in the mix for that. Will he win another one? We'll see. But bottom line, he's done literally all of that with Ryan Lindgren as his right-hand man. The two of them debuted around the same time. I want to say, I think the season that Lindgren debuted, remember he only played 5 games. I don't think Fox was there yet, but the two of them were both there the following season. And it's been a match made in heaven. Like I said, I think the two of them really complement each other very well. They're very close off the ice, even from a personal standpoint. I'm sure Adam Fox loves the fact that his buddy's going to be sticking around for at least one more season here. So Adam Fox is a big winner from this deal as well. It's hard to really come up with any losers, but I'll throw this out there. I'm going to say any Ranger defenseman who was hoping to find a way into the opening night lineup, find a way into just the lineup in general this season. The top 6 spots are pretty well spoken for. With Zach Jones being the 6th defenseman, they'll frame it as a competition between him and probably Chad Ruedel. But it's hard to envision any scenario, barring injury, of course, where the obvious 6 defensemen are not the 6 guys that are out there on opening night. So I think losers from this deal, maybe somebody like Chad Ruedel, who's probably going to open the season as a number 7 defenseman now. You could maybe throw Matthew Robertson in there as well, because he's this big prospect, or he was, and now there's not really any buzz about him, and there doesn't really seem to be a path for Matthew Robertson to be playing hockey games, NHL regular season games for the New York Rangers. So you can throw pretty much any defenseman that was hoping to crack the Ranger lineup into that category as losers of this deal. Another winner, touch on this not that long ago, Ranger cap space for next season. Because if this was a longer contract for Ryan Lindgren, this very well might be the reason why the Rangers only wanted to make it a 1-year deal. If this was a longer deal, even at less money, like $3.8 million per season for the next 3 years, well, next offseason is when it all hits the fan. That's when the Rangers have a lot of free agents. They got to find a way to get these guys under contract. And if you sign Ryan Lindgren past this upcoming season, now his cap hit, whether it would be like $3.5 million, $3.8 million, $4 million, whatever it might be, it would be overlapping with next offseason when you've got guys like Igor and Lafreniere and Miller all as free agents. So it's it's a win for the Rangers in their salary cap situation. They've got some money coming off the books next season. They're going to have to spend just about all of that re-signing their own guys. But the shorter deal does mean that Lindgren's contract will not overlap with next offseason when you're going to need that money to throw at guys like Lafreniere and Igor Shesterkin. Also, touch on this not that long ago. We'll do one more winner here before we move on to some other things. I want to talk about whether or not this is Ryan Lindgren's final season with the New York Rangers. We'll get to that in just a second. But one more winner here, the Ranger penalty kill. And again, I talked about that a little bit earlier. It's been an elite unit. It's been a huge part of the Rangers' success and the things that they've been able to accomplish over the past handful of seasons. The PK shows up big in big games. They got a lot of guys that know what they're doing out there. And Ryan Lindgren, I mean, you guys know the deal with him. He's going to be down on the ice, blocking shots, seems to always have good position on the penalty kill as well, get some timely clears. Ryan Lindgren, heck of a penalty killer. And the Rangers being third in the league last year, being, I think, like third or fifth the year before, they're always in that upper echelon of teams. And Ryan Lindgren, as we mentioned earlier, big part of that as well. So going to keep everything rolling. Want to conclude today's episode by talking again about whether or not this might be Ryan Lindgren's final season as a member of the New York Rangers, and we will do that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Indeed. We are driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Figure we can talk about the long-term future, or perhaps even the lack thereof, for Ryan Lindgren with the Rangers to conclude today's episode. I'm going to put a percentage on it at the end of today's episode, but I do want to go ahead. We're going to do some salary cap gymnastics here because I think it's important to kind of just look at the lay of the land here, specifically as it pertains to next offseason. When, like I said, it's going to hit the fan. The Rangers have a lot of work to do when it comes to hanging on to their own homegrown guys, the guys that they really need to keep in the fold. So the current salary cap for this upcoming NHL season is $88 million. That is a $4.5 million rise from last season. We don't know what the salary cap is going to be next year, which presents a challenge in its own right to trying to figure this out, but we're going to do our best here. When cap friendly was still a thing, it predicted that next season, 2025-2026, the salary cap would be $92 million. That would represent a $4 million raise from this season to next season. So we're going to go with that number. We're going to work off of $92 million. When you look at the Rangers that are under contract for next season, not the one coming up right now, the next season, 2025-2026, it adds up to $58.17 million. Give or take a couple of bucks this way or that way. But for all intents and purposes, $58.17 million. That leaves the Rangers with about $34 million in cap space, which sounds like a lot. It gets you excited. And, oh, my God, we're going to sign this guy. We're going to trade for that guy. You got to hold on just a second here, though, because you got to remember that the Rangers have a lot of their own free agents that they need to take care of first, guys that they need to keep in the field. So for starters, we subtract the $58 million that the Rangers have tied up in guys that are under contract next season. We subtract that from the $92 million cap ceiling next year. And again, that leaves us with $34 million. Here's all the free agents that they have next year. It's no shortage of names. You've got, for UFAs, Riley Smith. He'll probably walk, but you've got Riley Smith, Jimmy Vesey, Ryan Lindgren, Chad Ruedel, Igor Shesterkin, and Jonathan Quick. The RFAs next year, these are guys that some of them have arbitration rights, some of them do not. But the RFAs next year, there are 7 of those. You got Kakko, Lafreniere, Edstrom, Cooley, Rempe, Miller, and Jones. So that's 13 players, 6 UFAs, 7 RFAs. So what I want to do, if we're going to try to determine whether Lindgren will be back, whether it's feasible that they'll sign him beyond this upcoming season, let's work from the top, from like, we'll say most important player to least important player. We're not going to go all the way through this, but we're going to start with the guys that are probably, not even probably, they will be bigger priorities for the Rangers than Ryan Lindgren. We got to start with Igor Shesterkin. We know that he wants to be the highest paid goalie in the NHL. He has every right to ask for that. He's been an amazing player for the Rangers ever since he got here. Let's say that Igor Shesterkin gets $12 million per season from the Rangers. The current highest paid goalie is actually still Carey Price. He's at $10.5 million. Let's say that Igor Shesterkin gets $12 million per season. We subtract that from the $34 million cap space that the Rangers have. We are now down to $22 million. Let's say Alexis Lafreniere gets $8 million per season. And I don't know for sure exactly how this is going to go. You know, it could be higher, it could be less for any of these players, but we'll say Laf gets $8 million per season. We're already down to $14 million in cap space. It goes away very quickly. Then you've got K'Andre Miller. Now, Miller, I do think, will be a higher priority for the Rangers than Ryan Lindgren. Miller was the Rangers' own first-round draft pick. He's mostly been a good player ever since he's gotten the call to the NHL. He's younger than Ryan Lindgren, a little bit more of a more dynamic player than Ryan Lindgren as well when you factor in some of the offense, and somebody whose game will probably age a little bit better than Ryan Lindgren. So for all those reasons, I've got K'Andre Miller at a higher priority for the Rangers than Ryan Lindgren. Miller currently at $3.872 million per season. After this year, he's an RFA with arbitration rights. We'll say he gets like, I don't know, $4.8 million. I mean, does that sound about right for K'Andre Miller? That might be a little bit high, but that's the number that I came up with. If we take that away from the cap space that we have left, we are now down to $9.2 million. And we've got as many as 10 roster spots still to fill. That's a lot of roster spots with not a lot of money. You know what? We'll knock it down to 9 players. We'll say the Rangers only carry 22 players next season as a way to kind of, dance around the salary cap here. So you've got $9.2 million left for 9 players. However, we're going to do one more move here, one more transaction for the Rangers as I kind of fantasy book next year's offseason to figure out whether Ryan Lindgren can stay or not. I am very confident that this will be Jacob Trouba's final season as a member of the New York Rangers. They'll look to trade him in the offseason. If that doesn't happen, if they can't move all $8 million of his cap hit, or if they can't move a good portion of it, then they'll buy him out. We'll go with the buyout here as the most likely outcome. So if that's the case, then Jacob Trouba, once they buy him out, that'll be a $4 million cap hit for the Rangers, but you'll save $4 million. So you're now up from $9.2 million in cap space to $13.2 million left in cap space. You've got $13.2 million for 9 players. That cracks the door for a Lindgren return. But if you do that, then you're not going to be able to do much of anything else. At that point, it's just patchwork. You're going to have a lot of guys making league minimum or just a little bit above the league minimum. Maybe somebody like Jimmy Vesey sticks around. You can fill out the rosters with players like that, but you're not going to be getting any more superstar players as far as UFAs from around the league. So that's kind of where we're at right now as far as the salary cap situation is concerned. That's also why I said earlier in today's episode that if you really like Ryan Lindgren, my advice is to enjoy this as much as you can because it's going to be tight next year. Not impossible. You never know what other moves they could look to pull. There could be something completely out of right field where they move this cap hit, move that cap hit, whatever it might be. But again, even putting all the money aside or somewhat aside, you're going to have the same issue next offseason that you're having with Ryan Lindgren right now, and that's the fact that the Rangers seemingly do not want to go long-term with Ryan Lindgren. Well, Ryan Lindgren is a UFA next year. He might want to get some term from somebody, whether it's the Rangers or someone else, and him being a UFA, there's 31 other teams that can talk to him. Somebody's going to give him 4 years, maybe even 5 years. We'll see how it goes. Certainly, every team has to be aware of his injury history, but I think Ryan Lindgren will be somebody that is coveted enough that he won't have any problem finding a nice lengthy contract for himself next offseason. I said a little while ago here that I would put a percentage on this at the end of the episode here today. I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to say right now it's 60-40 that Ryan Lindgren walks after this season. 60-40 that this will be his final season as a member of the New York Rangers. It just, to me, doesn't feel like the Rangers are comfortable going anything even approaching long-term with Ryan Lindgren. They were willing to give him more money to get him under contract for 1 year for this upcoming season in exchange for not going too far, as far as the length of the contract. And they don't want to be in a situation where they give him a 4 or 5 year deal and then his game falls off of a cliff in like year 2 of that deal. That would not be a good situation for anybody. And I don't think it's quite the same as Dan Girardi. I've talked about this in the past. A lot of people like to make that comparison. Dan Girardi was a lot older than Ryan Lindgren when he signed a 6-year extension. I believe Girardi was like 32 when that happened. Ryan Lindgren right now is 26, so that's quite the difference. But I can understand the Rangers having this stance. A couple of things that work in Lindgren's favor, though, because I know there's some big Ryan Lindgren fans out there. Count me among you. Some things that kind of give some hope that maybe they will sign a deal with Ryan Lindgren past this upcoming season. For starters, the Rangers don't really have a lot of like top tier prospects at defensemen, certainly not as many defensemen as they do forwards. You know, when it comes to forward, a lot of us are getting excited about some of these young players that the Rangers have in their pipeline, guys that in some cases don't seem to be too far away from sticking in the NHL. Obviously, Brent Hoffman made a very brief cameo last year, 3 games. Brett Berard seems like he's knocking on the door. Adam Sakura, you know, we could see him this year. It's at least possible, but he's not too far away. If not this year, then certainly the year after that. And Gabe Perreault's on his way as well. There's a lot of, really exciting prospects when it comes to forward for the New York Rangers. As far as defensemen, I mean, it's not really as stacked as forward is. Now, obviously, they just drafted Emery in the first round. They like him, but you got to figure, he's at least a couple of years away here. You know, you've got Drew Fortescue, former 3rd rounder. They seem to like him as well. I mean, who else is there really? Matthew Robertson, I mentioned him earlier, but his star seems to have dimmed a little bit as far as, how high the Rangers are on him as a prospect. Victor Mancini, former 5th rounder, 22 years old now. I mean, I guess he's an option too, but the bottom line, they don't have nearly as many big time, like just stud prospects at defenseman like they do at forward. And another thing that works in Ryan Lindgren's favor, if you're hanging on and hoping that he's back and a Ranger for more than just one more season, is there's a human side to this game. This game has a pulse. We can talk about style of play and the somewhat scary injury history and the cap situation. Those are all valid concerns, but this guy makes a difference. This guy makes an undeniable difference when he's in the lineup for the New York Rangers. The phrase that gets used by me and by a lot of other people as well, the heart and soul of the New York Rangers. And I mentioned the record a little bit earlier in today's episode. I'm going to get to that right now. With Ryan Lindgren in the lineup, the Rangers are 199, 103, and 31. Or if we put the losses together, they are 199 and 134. Without Ryan Lindgren in the lineup, they are 51, 53, and 17. And if we combine the losses, they are 51 and 70. So again, let's put all the losses together. With Lindgren, 199 and 134. Without Lindgren, 51 and 70. That is a staggering difference. That's one of those things. It's too big of a sample size to ignore at this point. Now, are there other factors going on? When Ryan Lindgren was injured, maybe this was happening, or maybe Igor was in a slump, or whatever it might be. But that is too big of a sample size to simply ignore. And this game does have a pulse. It does have a heartbeat. And Ryan Lindgren is somebody that clearly makes a very positive impact on the New York Rangers. So that's something that's working in his favor as well. I think the odds are against him being back after this upcoming season, but never say never. It's certainly not impossible that he could return into the fold after this upcoming season concludes. We will see. Figure we can pretty much call it there for today. Reminder about fantasy hockey. If you played last year, DM me or email me. We'll do a roll call in a future episode so I can, mention everybody that's confirmed that they'll be back this upcoming season. If you didn't play, same thing, email me or DM me. And overtime stories. We've done this a couple of times in the past. If you have a story from any of the Ranger 4 playoff overtime game-winning goals from this past season, send it to me. I'm going to share these in a future episode of Locked On New York Rangers. Just going to read them one at a time. I've already heard back from a couple of you guys. Looking forward to hearing some more stories as well. And one more announcement. Locked On for all the NHL podcast is going to be 3 days a week for, I believe, through the middle of September. So we got about a 6-week period here where it's only going to be 3 episodes per week. And then once that time period comes and goes, we'll be back to 5 days a week, as always, and just rolling through the preseason, the regular season, the postseason, and hopefully concluding with the Rangers winning the Stanley Cup. But that will do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, this @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.